Have you ever looked back at your life and realized the moments that changed you the most didn't seem all that important at the time? Maybe it was a conversation, a quiet afternoon, a drive home from work, or a moment you almost forgot until years later. It's funny how life works that way. Sometimes the biggest turning points in our lives don't feel big at all. They just feel like another ordinary day. Hey there, welcome to Momma Drama and Trauma. I'm Jenny, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Have a seat beside me on the porch swing for a while, and let's talk about the freedom we never expect. Maybe you've had a season in your life where everything changed, and you thought one big moment would finally make you feel like yourself again. Maybe you've been waiting for the day life feels a little lighter, hoping you'll wake up one morning and somehow know you've made it to the other side. I thought that's how it would work for me too. But looking back now, I realize the moments that changed me the most weren't the big ones at all. They were the quiet, ordinary moments I almost overlooked. Today, I want to share a few of those moments with you. So, have a seat beside me on the porch swing and let's get into it. Laying down what was never mine to carry. There was one evening I remember sitting out on my back porch with my journal in my lap and music playing softly in the background. The sun was starting to go down, and for once there wasn't anywhere I needed to be. I wasn't rushing to get dinner started or figuring out who needed a ride somewhere. It was just me, my thoughts, and the quiet. I remember looking out across the backyard and realizing how quiet my life had become. Not just around me, but inside me. That kind of quiet hadn't existed for a very long time. As I sat there writing, my mind drifted back to a drive my boys and I had taken to Chicago for a family wedding. We had 5 hours together in the car, and somewhere along the way, the conversation turned to their dad. They shared their frustrations with me. They talked about things they had already tried and conversations they had already had with him. I remember listening and then doing what I had done for so many years. I tried to fix it. I told them he was their dad and that he loved them. I reminded them that people make mistakes. I encouraged them to keep talking to him, to tell him how they felt, hoping somehow that if they just tried one more time, things would get better. Their response has stayed with me ever since. They looked at me and said, "We already have." I don't think I understood it then, but I do now. For so many years, I had carried the emotional weight of our family without even realizing I was carrying it. When something felt broken, I believed it was somehow my job to help put it back together. Even after the divorce, that instinct never really left. I wanted to protect my boys. I wanted them to have a healthy relationship with their dad because despite everything that had happened between him and me, he was still their father. I never wanted my hurt to become their hurt. But somewhere between that drive to Chicago and that quiet evening on my back porch, something shifted inside me. I realized their relationship with their dad wasn't mine to manage anymore. Not because I stopped caring, not because I stopped wanting the best for them, but because it had never really been mine to carry in the first place. They didn't need me standing in the middle, translating feelings or offering advice every time something went wrong. They needed someone who would simply listen, love them, and trust them to navigate that relationship for themselves. As strange as it sounds, laying that responsibility down felt like freedom. I couldn't build a relationship with their dad for them. I couldn't carry it. I couldn't fix it. That part belonged to them and their dad. Once I accepted that, I noticed something unexpected. The energy I had spent trying to hold together a relationship that wasn't mine to hold was suddenly available for something else. Instead of worrying about their relationship with him, I could simply enjoy my relationship with them. We laughed more, we talked more. I became less focused on solving problems and more focused on being their mom. Looking back now, I think that's the freedom nobody talks about. Sometimes freedom doesn't come from getting something you've always wanted. Sometimes it comes from finally setting down something you were never meant to carry. Making room for me. A while after I finally let go of trying to carry everyone else's relationships, I remember sitting at the round table in the real estate office where I worked. It was one of my favorite places to spend the day. If you walked in, you'd probably never guess it was a real estate office. Beautiful chandeliers hang from the ceiling, giving the room a warm glow. The furniture felt more like something you'd find in a cozy home than in an office, and somewhere in the background, I could hear coffee brewing. It was quiet, not the kind of quiet that feels lonely, the kind that gives you room to think. I had my laptop open in front of me, creating marketing content for one of the agents when my mind started to wander. As I sat there, I realized something had changed, not just around me, but inside me too. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't spending every ounce of my emotional energy trying to make sure everyone else was okay. I had finally stopped carrying something that was never mine to carry, and without even realizing it, that created space in my life for someone I hadn't paid much attention to in a very long time. Me. By the time I was sitting in that office, I had already done a lot of healing. I wasn't living in the hardest days anymore. I was looking back at them, trying to understand what had helped me get through them and what I had learned along the way. I'd spend my days creating marketing content for real estate agents. I'd sit at my computer designing graphics, writing posts, and helping tell someone else's story. I love the creative side of it, and somewhere in the middle of those ordinary work days, a thought quietly found its way into my mind. What if I did this for myself? What if I created something that shared my story instead? I think the reason that thought found me was because of everything I'd experienced after my marriage ended. I'd spent hours reading books, listening to audiobooks, and searching for podcasts about healing after betrayal. I kept hoping someone would say the thing I needed to hear. I started reading more than I ever had before. I was listening to audiobooks almost every chance I got. I'd listen while I was driving, while I was cleaning the house, and sometimes I'd just sit outside on the porch with my journal, music playing in the background, trying to make sense of everything life had become. I was consuming anything I could find about healing after betrayal. I listened to podcast after podcast, audiobook after audiobook, hoping someone would finally say the thing I needed to hear. Instead, I kept hearing people talk about how they'd healed, how life got better, how they were happy again, and every time I heard it, I'd think the same thing. You don't understand. Not because I thought they were lying, I believed they had healed. I just didn't believe they had loved the way I had loved. I know that probably sounds strange now, especially knowing where I am today. But when you're in that kind of heartbreak, I think a lot of us believe our pain is different. We convince ourselves that no one could possibly understand because no one could have loved as deeply as we did. That was me. I remember thinking, You don't get it. If you love the way I loved, you wouldn't be telling me healing was possible. Looking back now, I smile a little because I know exactly why I felt that way. I wasn't ready to believe healing existed because I couldn't imagine a version of my life where I wasn't carrying that pain. But something interesting was happening while I was reading all those books and listening to all those podcasts. Little by little, they weren't just helping me heal, they were helping me grow. They were reminding me that I still had a voice. As I sat there working on marketing content that day in the office, a thought popped into my head. Maybe I should tell my story. Not because I had all the answers or because I had it all figured out, but because I knew what it felt like to wonder if healing was even possible. Looking back now, I don't think that thought came out of nowhere. It had been quietly growing ever since my life had changed. I had spent countless hours reading books, listening to audiobooks, and searching for podcasts about healing. I wanted to understand what had happened to me, but even more than that, I wanted to know if life could ever feel normal again. Over time, I noticed something. Almost every story I found began after the healing had already happened. People would talk about how much better life had become, what they had learned, and how they had moved forward. They'd explain what worked for them, how they got through it, or the steps they took to rebuild their lives. But that's not what I was looking for. I wasn't looking for someone to tell me how to fix it or give me another list of steps on how to move on. I just wanted to hear someone say, I know exactly how impossible this feels. As I sat there creating content for other people, that realization stayed with me. I remember thinking, what if I did this for myself? What if I created something for the person I used to be? Not for the woman who had already healed, but for the woman sitting on her kitchen floor wondering how she was ever going to make it through another day. That's the moment I realized I didn't just have a story to tell. I had the story I had been searching for all along. I had no idea how to start a podcast. I didn't know what equipment I needed. I didn't know how to edit audio or upload an episode or whether anyone would even listen. I just knew there was a story inside me that wanted to be told. Looking back now, I don't think that idea would have ever found me if I had still been spending all of my energy trying to fix everyone else's lives. The moment I started investing that same time, love, and energy back into myself, I started discovering parts of me I thought were gone forever. The podcast wasn't the beginning. Learning to invest in myself was. Everything else simply grew from there. Finding my voice. I remember sitting in my living room one afternoon with my laptop balanced on my knees. The curtains were open, letting the afternoon sunlight pour into the room. The house was completely quiet. The boys and Maisie were at their dad's for the weekend, and for the first time in a long time, there wasn't anything I had to do or anyone who needed me. It was just me. I looked around the house for a minute, almost unsure what to do with all of the quiet. Not long before that, quiet had felt lonely. Now it felt like an opportunity. I remember thinking, I'm just going to tell my story. Not for a podcast, not for social media, not because I thought anyone else would ever hear it. I simply needed to get it out of me. So I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and started talking. I started with the first week after I discovered my husband's affair. I talked about everything I could remember, the conversations, the emotions, the sleepless nights, the moments that changed me. Then I moved into the second week, and before I knew it, I was walking month by month through one of the hardest seasons of my life. As I worked my way through those memories, I found myself going back and reading old text messages. Some of them made me cry. Some of them made me shake my head. Some of them made me realize just how desperately I had been trying to hold on to a life that was already slipping away. If I'm being honest, those texts were probably the hardest part. Not because they reminded me of what had happened, but because they reminded me of who I was while I was living through it. I could hear the fear in my words. I could hear how desperately I wanted answers. I could see myself trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. There were moments I wasn't proud of, things I said differently than I would today, ways I reacted that reflected how hurt and overwhelmed I was. As hard as it was to read those messages, I didn't look away. For the first time, I wasn't reading them to judge myself. I was reading them to understand myself. Instead of asking, "Why did I do that?" I found myself asking, "What was I feeling that made me respond that way?" That changed everything, because healing isn't pretending those versions of ourselves never existed. It's having the courage to look them in the eyes, learn from them, and gently say, "We've grown since then." It would have been easy to skip over those parts, but I didn't want to tell a polished version of my story. If I was going to do this, I wanted to tell the truth. There was something different about saying those things out loud. I'd thought them 1,000 times in my own head. I'd replayed conversations. I'd questioned myself. I'd picked apart decisions. But hearing my own voice say those things was different than simply thinking them. It was as if I stopped hiding from myself. Every time I admitted something out loud, it seemed to lose a little bit of its power over me. As I kept talking, I realized I wasn't just telling the story of my marriage ending. I was telling the story of myself. Somewhere in the middle of all those memories, something unexpected happened. I started believing in myself. For the first time, I started believing that maybe my story mattered. For so long, I'd been listening to podcasts and audiobooks, hoping someone would make me feel understood. Now I found myself wondering if maybe my story could help someone else feel that way. Not because I could fix their pain, not because I could tell them how to heal, simply because I could sit beside them and honestly say, "I know, I remember feeling exactly that same way." Looking back now, I think that's the afternoon everything began to change. People sometimes ask me when Momma Drama and Trauma started. The truth is, it didn't begin with a microphone. It didn't begin with a logo. It didn't even begin with my first episode. It began on a quiet afternoon in my living room with sunlight pouring through the curtains, an empty house, a laptop balanced on my knees, and one simple decision: to finally stop carrying my story in silence. That afternoon reminded me of something I'd forgotten. My voice mattered, not because other people might hear it someday, but because I needed to hear it. I needed to hear myself tell the truth. I needed to hear myself admit the parts that were hard. I needed to hear myself believe that my story was worth telling. Sometimes we think healing begins when someone else finally understands us. For me, healing began the day I finally understood myself. That afternoon, I thought I was simply telling my story. Looking back now, I realize I was finding my voice again, remembering the girl who loved to create. By this point, I had settled into a new routine. Most mornings, I'd make myself an iced coffee, walk into my office, and sit down at my desk. Over time, that office had become my little creative space. My notebook was always nearby. My computer stayed open more than it was closed, and before long, Canva had become one of my favorite places to spend my time. It started out so simply. I'd open my computer to work on something for the podcast, and before I knew it, hours had passed. One design turned into another. One idea led to the next. I'd create a graphic, then think of another one. I'd finish writing something and another idea would pop into my head before I even had a chance to close my laptop. It felt like something inside me had finally been awakened again. The podcast had become more than just a place to tell my story. It became the place where all the creative parts of me started coming back to life. I'd catch myself thinking, I wish I would have had a workbook like this when I was going through everything, so I'd start creating one. Then I'd think, maybe a journal would help someone slow down and really think about how they're feeling, so I'd start writing one. Before long, I wasn't just recording podcast episodes anymore. I was dreaming about workbooks, journals, reflection guides, and the porch swing. Every new idea seemed to give birth to another one, and instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt excited. I remember sitting there one afternoon looking at everything spread across my computer screen and smiling, because somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten just how much I loved creating. It took me right back to being a little girl. I've always loved writing. My mom still has stories I wrote years ago. Even as a kid, I loved making things, imagining things, and putting my thoughts onto paper. Somewhere along the way, life got busy. Marriage, raising 3 boys, work, and responsibilities slowly took over. And without even realizing it, I stopped making time for that part of myself. She never disappeared. She was just waiting for me to come back. Looking back now, I don't think I became a creative person after my marriage ended. I always was one. Life had simply buried that part of me beneath years of taking care of everyone else. The more I invested in myself, the more she started showing up again. Every workbook I created, every journal I wrote, every podcast episode I recorded, every hour I spent designing something in Canva, none of it felt like work. It felt like coming home. I used to think healing meant becoming someone new. Now I see it differently. Sometimes healing is remembering who you've been all along. Maybe that's the freedom I never expected. Not freedom from my past, freedom to become more of the person I was always meant to be. Porch swing reflection. As I look back now, I realize none of those moments felt life-changing while I was living them. Sitting on the back porch with my journal, working quietly in a real estate office, sitting on my couch telling my story out loud, spending hours in my office writing, creating, and dreaming about what could come next. At the time, they just felt like ordinary days. But ordinary days have a way of changing our lives. I used to think freedom would come from reaching the other side of divorce. I thought it would be the day I stopped hurting or the day I no longer thought about everything that had happened. I thought freedom was something I would eventually arrive at. Instead, freedom found me little by little. It found me the day I stopped carrying relationships that were never mine to fix. It found me when I started investing that same time and energy back into myself. It found me when I finally told my story out loud and realized my voice mattered. It found me when I remembered the little girl who loved to write, create, and dream. Looking back now, I don't think healing made me into someone new. I think healing helped me remember who I had been all along. Maybe that's what freedom really is, not becoming someone else. Simply having the courage to come back to yourself. So before we leave the porch swing today, I want to leave you with one question. What part of yourself is waiting for permission to come back to life? Maybe it's something you've always loved but slowly stopped making time for. Maybe it's a dream you've convinced yourself is too late to chase. Maybe it's simply allowing yourself to believe that your story still has another chapter waiting to be written. Whatever it is, I hope you'll give yourself permission to take one small step toward it this week. You don't have to have the whole journey figured out. Sometimes all it takes is setting down one thing you've been carrying to finally have room to pick up something you've been missing. Thank you so much for spending a little time with me here on the porch swing today. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me over on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube by searching Momma Drama and Trauma, where we continue these conversations throughout the week. I'm also excited to share that the porch swing will be launching very soon. It's something I've poured my heart into with monthly reflections, guided workbooks, audio messages, and deeper conversations for those who want to continue this healing journey together. I can't wait to share it with you. And if you're part of our Facebook community, we're getting closer to our goal of 400 followers. Once we reach it, we'll be celebrating with a special giveaway as a thank you for all of your support. I'd love for you to come join us over there and be part of it. As always, you are strong, you are worthy, and your story matters. Until next time, take care of you.